Welcome back to Haunted and Historic Australia for another episode in our Ghost series. This is part 2 of our creepy Port Arthur settlement stories. In part 1, we looked at the parsonage that was considered as the second most haunted home in Australia. This time, we're looking at a couple of other residences that may not have a title of most haunted, but is still pretty scary if you're going to go to Port Arthur and check them out. The first of these stories starts out in the Commandant's residence, which was home to Commandant Charles O'Hara Booth. Now, he didn't have a very good time at Port Arthur, and this begins his story. Charles O'Hara Booth was a British military officer. He served in India and the West Indies before being appointed to the first commandant of the original settlement at Port Arthur in 1833. Under his command, the township of Port Arthur was laid out on an extensive scale, harbour construction carried out and reclamation undertaken, a government farm established at Safety Cove, and the Sephirmore telegraph system. Booth arranged for his own home to be erected on high ground on the fringe of the settlement, with a commanding view over the bay. It was a simple 4-roomed timber cottage with a separate kitchen linked to the house by a covered walkway. Subsequent additions included gardens, stables, and the high stone perimeter walls, all added by later commandants to create the imposing residence that remains today. For 5 years, Booth lived alone in the house he designed until 1838. He married widow Elizabeth Eagle. His new bride and her 2 young children moved into the commandant's house, and Booth engaged a nanny to help with the stepchildren's upbringing and to assist Elizabeth around the home. Apparently, the nanny took her duties very seriously. There's evidence Nanny's still jealously guarding her domain today. One day, a visitor walked into a back room of the house and saw a woman sitting in a rocking chair, brandishing a stick. She rudely ordered the woman to get herself and everybody else out. Nanny doesn't want anyone to stay very long. Either Nanny spends a lot of her time in her old rocking chair, or it seems the chair possesses a unique ability to self-activate. The old chair is very solid, and only the strongest of gales is likely to make the chair move without human intervention. Yet on Christmas Eve in 1987, a Port Arthur employee found the chair rocking by itself. The employee, a non-believer in the paranormal, investigated every conceivable non-paranormal cause for the chair's freaky movements, including strings that were attached to the chair by a hoaxer, but no rational explanation was ever uncovered. There's another spooky aspect to Nanny's room at the back of the house. Attempts by visitors to take pictures inside Nanny's room sometimes produce quite unexpected results. Camera jams, flashes fail to work, and when someone does manage to take a photograph, faint, shapeless blurs appear on the screen. Late one afternoon, when most of the visitors were getting ready to leave the settlement, some visitors witnessed a young child enter the commandant's house through a side door, a door that had been locked by a guide after the last tour group left. She was a fair-haired, blue-eyed girl wearing a pinafore over a blue dress. No one in authority had any idea who she was, or what she was doing there, or whether it was simply that the visitors had heard one too many ghost stories that day. There was another sighting the following day, and when this was researched, it was discovered that there had been 10 sightings of this little girl over the years. One of the people who saw her thought her name started with an A or an E. The other thought her name was Amy or Emmy. It is believed that the little girl may be the spirit of Amelia Jane Booth, stepdaughter to Charles O'Hara Booth. While it appears that Nanny and Amelia Jane linger at the commandant's house, so too is the commandant reluctant to leave. Charles O'Hara Booth has been observed several times by visitors, and is described as still wearing his full dress uniform. Booth had suffered a personal setback in 1838 when he became lost in the bush of Forestier Peninsula with a convict assistant named Joseph Turner. The pair lost their way in the Central Hills and became separated. Turner found his way to the house of a settler, Captain John Spotswood, who raised the alarm. Thomas Lempriere led the search party of soldiers, constables and settlers. By the time Booth was 3 days overdue and had spent 3 nights in cold autumn weather, weak with hunger and with only his dogs for company. One of his dogs, Sandy, spotted a searcher and took him to Booth, who was frostbitten and too weak to call out. He was taken by boat and railway back to Port Arthur, but he never fully recovered from the ordeal. Following his brush with death, Commandant Booth experienced recurring bouts of sudden fever, which left him both physically and mentally overwhelmed. He retired from the army the following year and later moved his family to Newtown in Hobart, where he died in 1851. Perhaps he retained fond memories of the years he spent designing and commanding the settlement of Port Arthur, and had his physical and mental health not declined so rapidly, he would have continued to fulfil his duties there. Among a group of recent visitors on a guided tour of the Commandant's house were a mother and her young daughter. During the visit, the child wandered off to other parts of the house. When her mother heard her little daughter chatting amiably with someone, she traced her daughter's voice to the Commandant's bedroom. She found her daughter beside the Commandant's bed, talking to an empty pillow. The mother held out her hand and said, "Come." "One moment, mother," the child responded. "I'm having a nice talk with this man here. He's so sick." After telling the guide of this incident, they returned to the Commandant's bedroom, where they found the perfect indentation of a man's body on the bedding. Now, apart from Charles O'Hara Booth and the nanny being cited, as well as a possible sighting of Amelia Jane Booth, there's also been other things happening around the Commandant's residence. The gate to the Commandant's residence has been opened by unseen hands in full view of a group of tourists, and many visitors, wristwatchers, stop at the moment they enter the building. A male attendant claimed that when alone in the house one day, he was grabbed on the bottom by an invisible assailant, and a spectral male figure with its head twisted to one side, like a hanging victim, has been seen at least twice in the hallway. Bells installed in the 19th century to summon servants occasionally ring when the house is empty, and a phantom coach and horses has been heard, and on one occasion seen by groups visiting the cottage at night. One visitor started a sketch of the Commandant's residence while visiting Port Arthur, but did not have time to complete it. Some days later, and many kilometres away, the amateur artist got the sketch out to finish it from memory, and found to her amazement that a female figure in period costume had been neatly and mysteriously drawn in the foreground. A ghostly legacy seems also to have been left by the Commandant's cottage from the time when the house was the Carnarvon Hotel. A group of archaeologists sleeping there during restoration in 1983 had several terrifying experiences. One female heard footsteps in the night, climbing the stairs and entering the room she slept in. No figure appeared, but a soft groan echoed through the dark house before footsteps returned the way they had come. Another archaeologist was awakened in the night by the hand and face of an elderly woman. No body or arms. Looking over his bed, then floating up toward the ceiling and fading away. A different female member of the party claimed to have seen a vision on the ceiling of a room where they were all playing cards one night. She saw, she said, a woman being chased by a man Her description of the woman tallied with her colleague's memory of the face he had seen, and later both recognised her in an old photograph that they were shown of the former manageress of the Carnarvon Hotel. Besides the Commandant's residence stands the old powder magazine surmounted by an impressive watchtower. A reliable witness claims that he was grabbed on the arm by an invisible hand when walking nearby, and on one memorable morning the sound of a ghostly bugle was heard playing Reveille from the empty tower. Directly behind the watchtower stands Tower Cottage, the former married officers' quarters. Two people who slept there at different times in recent years either dreamed identical dreams or saw the same apparition. A soldier in a red uniform leaning over the bed looking down at them. Yeah, scary. Directly across the bay from the Commandant's residence stands Jetty Cottage at the end of the Commandant's jetty. The ghost of a young man, possibly that of Private Robert Young, who was drowned near the jetty, aged just 20 years in 1840. He is said to be the one that haunts that area. According to the account, a woman who stayed at Jetty Cottage a few years back woke in fright to find the ghost in her room. He had straight black hair and wore a ruffled white shirt. Another guest at the time saw the same figure sitting on the front steps of the cottage and on the jetty on 2 consecutive nights. The second guest also claims to have heard a woman screaming at exactly 10:30 at night, each night. Others too have heard the pitiful screams that resound through the lonely cottage and float across the water. Like the Commandant's cottage, the medical officer's residence, which housed a succession of doctors and their families, is also reputed to be haunted. When it was used as a hotel in the 1920s, a lady guest was wakened in the middle of the night by a tiny girl dressed in an old-fashioned nightgown, tapping on the outside of her bedroom window, meters above the ground. And attendants in recent times have heard children's laughter coming from empty upstairs rooms. A lady dressed in pearly grey is also said to haunt the medical officer's residence. According to a former resident, this ghost was often seen drifting down a passageway in the house and terrified at least 3 housekeepers who resigned in quick succession. The same resident claimed he was awakened one night by the grey lady standing at the foot of his bed, snorting loudly. He assumed she was displeased at his presence, and he was not overjoyed at hers either. He switched on the light and shouted, "Go away! Get out now! Get out of here!" and claims she did, never to return again. At least not while he was there. It is believed that some of the autopsies or dissections took place in the senior surgeon's basement. There was a fireplace in the room above the basement where the ash would funnel down and come into the basement, covering up or absorbing up any blood or fluid that was left on the floor. And it is also believed that in a tour group, a father and his son on the tour looked over the guide's shoulder as he was saying this, and they could clearly see a man's face staring back at them from the hole. Freaky. The Port Arthur Church, now in ruins, stands a few metres from the parsonage. When foundations for the church were being dug in 1853, 2 convicts, William Riley and Joseph Shuttleworth, got into an argument. Riley killed Shuttleworth with a blow from a pickaxe and was hanged for the crime. The following year, another convict fell to his death from the roof of the almost completed building after another argument. It was popularly believed that these 2 violent deaths were the reason the church was never consecrated, which is untrue. It was never consecrated to one denomination because it served all denominations. Less easy to explain is the fact that ivy, which grew in profusion on every other part of the building, would never grow on the bloodied spot where the second convict landed to his death. The church also figured in a strange occurrence a few years back when a large party of tourists were assembled there at 10:45 p.m. It was a clear, starry night. Suddenly, the whole church was lit by a brilliant flash of light that illuminated every side and every corner. It was not lightning and was far brighter than any camera flash could produce. There are many other stories of ghostly activity at Port Arthur. Not all are confined to the comfortable houses and cottages. The multi-storied penitentiary, built in 1848 and now a roofless shell, seems blessedly free of ghosts at the moment, but the smaller model or separate prison, where inmates were kept in solitary confinement and required to wear masks to hide their features, echoes, it is said, to the screams of a 14-year-old prisoner who was confined in the condemned cell for 2 weeks awaiting execution. Whew, poor bugger. Another convict, William Carter, committed suicide in his cell in the model prison by hanging himself with the straps of his hammock. Tourists visiting this particular cell often experience unaccountable feelings of anxiety and depression long before they are told the story of Carter's suicide. Then there are the dark cells where prisoners were inhumanely imprisoned for long periods in total darkness and total silence. Is it a coincidence that light bulbs in one of the cells continuously blow just as visitors enter? Many prisoners arrived at Port Arthur insane, and many more became so after a spell in the punishment cells of that model prison. To cater for these unfortunates, an asylum was built. This quaint building with its 3-tiered tower became a museum, and the rear portion was converted into a staff tea room. 2 women working at the museum had a strange experience one day when a door slammed shut, trapping them in a small room. Try though they might, the heavy door would not budge. Their calls for help attracted 2 visitors walking by. The man tried to open the door from the outside, but it seemed to be stuck fast. His wife half-jokingly said, "Let me try," and applied her slender little arms to it. The door swung open effortlessly. It had never jammed before and has never jammed since. 2 other employees seated at a table in the staff tea room one day watched in amazement as a heavy ashtray glided across a flat bench top and had to be grabbed to stop it from falling to the floor. But of all the creepy places in the ghost-ridden location, the creepiest is not a building, but the uninhabited island a kilometre offshore, the Isle of the Dead. Now, we heard the story of Mark Jeffrey in our last episode. The Isle of the Dead can be visited today, and even on the brightest, sunniest days, there is an oppressive atmosphere there, far stronger than one feels in any conventional graveyard. The chances of encountering His Satanic Majesty are pretty remote, but with almost 2,000 bodies buried below, a few spirits would not be out of place. Well, that concludes our creepy stories from the Port Arthur site, but I am certain there is so much more to Tasmania that will be told in another episode. But that's it for this ghostly episode. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and hit that notification bell so you're aware when we're posting more ghostly tales from Australia.
I need somewhere I can have total isolation, and above all, atmosphere.
What lives in this house?
No one would want to live in Balpatermana.
What stalks these halls?
It's a cursed place.
Yes, I saw the movie.
What hides in these shadows? And who is playing that piano? Welcome to the House of the Long Shadows, home of mystery, suspense, danger. And now the four masters of horror are moving in. Vincent Price.
Sebastian, you are drunk.
Christopher Lee.
You're gonna show me of nothing.
Peter Cushing.
Roderick is still alive.
John Carradine.
Death is our only true destiny.
Joined by Desi Arnaz.
You could lose your life.
Worse.
Will this talented young man wager his very life for one night with this girl and these strange bedfellows? House of the Long Shadows.
There's one missing.
What is its diabolical secret?
And suddenly, out he jumped. He didn't even look human.
Which key unlocks the horrible truth? I'm afraid it has begun. And who spiked the punch? House of the Long Shadows. It's delightfully puzzling. It would appear that you are creating a mystery where there is none. And a frightfully good time. You must have heard us singing. House of the Long Shadows. The murderously funny mystery with a twist.
Yes, I see what you mean.
House of the Long Shadows. Vincent Price, that's me. Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing, John Carradine, and Desi Arnaz. In a Golan Globus production of a Pete Walker film. House of the Long Shadows. From Canon Releasing.
What happens at midnight?